Hey everybody, and welcome back to another RCT scenario playthrough. It is part 2 of our Aqua Park playthrough. This is scenario number 10 in the series. This is going to be a little bit of a quick video since we went a bit long last time, but I wanted to include the whole build of this Arrow custom looping coaster. But we will still have our real-time section and the before and after as usual, so there's still plenty to see. As we finish up this arrow from the last video, we now get into the path work and the queue and everything, so trying to bring that all up the hill without just a giant kind of straight stretch of pathway right up the hill. I try and break those up with landings and things. Typically, I don't like to go any more than 2 path tiles at a time before a landing. I've definitely broken that rule here already on the launch tower that we did last video, but for the most part, it's kind of a preference if I can. Just from a accessibility standpoint, typically you have a landing every it's I think 30 feet of horizontal travel distance. So in general, I like to at least include that just for a little bit of realism, I guess. But anyway, we are into the terraforming portion of this coaster now because it is kind of a mess from when we built it before. In general, we followed the terrain, but at the same time, I didn't want to force that, so at least we made it work kind of sort of close to the terrain, but now we can fix it. This helix is probably the worst bit. It's kind of awkward with this kind of half in, half out. And while I think it does look pretty cool, it is kind of a pain to make work just because we're up against the edge of the map there, so it's a little bit weird. I guess if you think about this realistically, this would probably be like artificial rock work or something, so not part of the hillside. But we don't have that in the game, so we're going to just do the best that we can to make it blend rather well. So I like to use those rock pieces and then also use a couple of these trees. The quarter tile trees are great because you can really squeeze them in there inside the helix, and then all these bushes. Really, any of this landscaping all just acts to soften the overall look of the build, and any kind of rough edges you can really soften with landscaping, so use that to your advantage when you do. Here I am sticking this section in a tunnel as well. The only reason for that is because the clearances between the bottom of the landscaping and the top of that rapids ride were super close before. I've always thought the clearances were a little bit weird on the rapids ride anyway, since you're using kind of half of that open tunnel for the trough itself, so it always feels a little bit tight in general, but I think it just looks nicer here when we've got a bit of height on top of the whole thing. And I'll do the similar look to what we did on the tunnel on the other side of the helix and put some rock on top, dirt and grass around it. I really don't like to transition too often from one thing or one type of landscape like rock or sand or something right to grass without a little bit of dirt and grass in there. You can absolutely do it. There's plenty of people who can do that well, but for me, I just kind of like to transition over across to it. We'll make sure we add our handyman little pathways in there, because otherwise people are going to get totally sick on this, because I'm guessing this is a fairly nausea-intense ride, but I don't, to be honest, know, because I don't think I looked at the stats. But changing out the colors a little bit, and now moving over to the other side here, and it is time for our last coaster, which is a vertical drop coaster. I saw initially when I was looking up stuff on this scenario that you had this coaster option, and we haven't built one yet, so I think it is high time to do so. We haven't done too many B&Ms in general for the playthrough because we just haven't had a lot of opportunity to use them or availability in the scenario even. So we are going to do something like that. First of all, I'm going to give these trains a little bit of a gradient because that was something that was requested in chat, and I actually kind of like the way that looked. That's always a nice look. Not too many coasters do that in real life, but the ones that do I always think look neat. But anyway, it feels like this vertical drop coaster is about perfect for this area. I kind of nabbed that in my head fairly early on, and we got this great island out here with the drop tower on it, so certainly we can circle that with kind of this high-speed section of this dive coaster. Now, because this is original game, we really don't have a lot of options with the dive coaster. We've got the 6-cross train, and that's all we can use. We've got the vertical loop, which I don't really like to use because it just feels too small for the width of the trains. And to be honest, there's only one vertical loop on any dive coaster in real life. That one's Yukon Striker, and that's a big loop rather than these small ones. So we're going to just avoid that in general and just do kind of a nice little sweeping layout here. You can kind of go the Oblivion style, where it's just a drop, a tunnel, a turn, and a brake run, or you can do a little bit more. Now, the usual ones these days have a couple of inversions there, a couple of roll inversions or something like that, but we're just going to use some nice little curves, kind of reminiscent of the one at Happy Valley in Chengdu, with a couple of these nice little twists and everything. No water splash, but I guess we could kind of fake that if we really wanted to go that way. But I thought it would be kind of nice to do this a little S-bend crossover of the drop section here, and then actually works fairly well to put this final thing into a helix here, which is what I'm kind of working on right now, to kind of dive down and into this carousel turn here into the brakes. And there we are, but we are one off on the side, so that's an easy thing to do. We can adjust up on the top. I'm going to do my little pre-drop 2 here with the little dip and climb, kind of an early B&M staple. So we'll drop a couple of these brake pieces in so we can run, we'll say 3 trains. It really just depends. They're really not going to get a super benefit out of 3 trains. Like 2 is probably sufficient on this one, but we can run the 3 anyways. So we'll go ahead and make a couple of adjustments there, and we are off to the races. I think it's a decent little layout, and it kind of fills in this area nicely. It's not super dense, and I really didn't want it to be very dense. I don't like super dense parks that are really large. In general, if it's going to be dense, I kind of like it to be a smaller, tighter park, and this park is on the larger side, so I try not to go kind of too dense in any one of these areas, which is why I've kind of spread out all of my rides and attractions and stuff. So I think in general this worked out okay. And this gives me a little bit of a time up here to build out a plaza and kind of mess with the land a little bit to clean this up a little bit. And then let's make this drop tunnel a feature. It's a little bit harder to open the whole thing up, even though those tunnels are a little bit suspect about how tight they might be clearance-wise. I don't think I'd want to be riding on the end if I was in this instance. Now we're going to bring back our scrambler that we have since moved what feels like 100 times now. Put that over here kind of nestled into this side. There's really not a lot of attractions on this side because the landscape isn't super suitable, but we've got kind of our 2 OG water rides there, and now we can go ahead and put this in there, and I think it fits actually pretty well. Nestles nicely into that space and feels like a kind of just good ride and kind of in passing as it goes along. Really, this up front space is where we can really stick a lot of rides because we've got the proper landscaping to do so. So having unlocked the swinging inverter ship, it feels like this is the right place to put it, and we're going to do our typical back-to-back situation here, which works okay for me. I don't necessarily love it because it's not the most common instance, but it does work for a soft guess gap standpoint, and so it helps us get our scenario goal, which we can see we're already in halfway through year 3, and we haven't hit our goal yet, but which was 900 if you recall. But that's not too hard, to be honest. You can easily crank out a lot of people if you need to, with some advertising campaigns and a couple of decent rides. So right now, having finished the major coasters, it was really my thought of just I want to crank out a couple of these little flat rides and other things like that, such as this Ferris wheel, which is always nice to put those up on the hill so you get a little bit of a view out from it, so it increased the overall height of the thing. Thought I'd make a little water feature here with a fountain and fence that thing up. Use the spooky fence because it's got that solid base on it with the rock. And going back through fixing a little bit of that vandalism. We haven't had quite as much since we put down the handyman paths and or focused areas, so I'm okay with that, and in general it worked okay, but I do need to fix a couple of things here and there. We are going to drop in our top spin on this side over here. Had to kill a bit of the mountain here, maybe a little more than I would have liked. I probably should have put this up perhaps by 1, but in general, not too bad. I am going to put a little water feature here in the back because it seems like something you typically see on a lot of at least older and or European top spins. Those were typically better themed than the US ones, and usually they had some kind of a water feature. Whether you got totally soaked and drenched like the Canada's Wonderland one, or it was just kind of a feature like say Douwenrail in the Netherlands, for example. But either way, I think it's a nice fit. And then finally, after deleting that water slide up at the front here, we kind of had this little pathway bridge that kind of looked like it was begging for some kind of a ride station up underneath. And I thought about the coaster initially, and then I was like, you know what? I think maybe it makes sense to do like a little car ride or something. So it's kind of an ease into the park a little bit. You kind of think about it, if I can't see this drop coaster having opened with the park. It feels like some kind of an addition, but car ride, yeah, for sure. So original park attraction at the front of the park seems like it makes sense to me, so we're gonna go ahead and drop that through there. A little bit of a challenge trying to work around the coaster there, not deleting all the supports on the thing, and also getting our entrance and our exit up to the top, especially because we are putting those both on the same side here. So we got to do a little bit of clever path work and tunnel work here to get our exit up to where we need it to be. I always kind of struggle with car rides. I don't really know why. It just, I don't know, I feel like they're always sort of a challenge to make look good, or I feel like I do the same thing every single time. We are going to raise a little bit of that landscaping there because I like at least one tile worth of coverage on top of a tunnel if I can. It just doesn't feel like enough space otherwise, or like, for example, a tree planted right on top of a tunnel. There's nowhere for the support or the roots to go. So you think about it practically, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I try and at least avoid that if we can, and see what's possible there. But I think that's okay. So that is, I think, one of our last rides. It might be our last ride as we go through and detail out the pathways here and put some fencing in, put some landscaping in, just do a little bit of highlighting of some of these features like that drop right there. Going to readjust the cue for this carousel just a little bit so we can make a square. It was a little bit of a weird detail there for a second, just based on how the pathway from the inverter ship connected across to it. You can see we're already getting a lot of sickness on the pathways from those, but those are fairly intense in general. So we're going to go with yellow for that initially, and then purple, because I feel like, I don't know, the yellow seemed just a little bit bright, and I kind of wanted a shade within the blue just to kind of keep with our typical Aqua Park theme across the whole thing. Now, granted, we didn't really do that on either the water slide or the corkscrew coaster, but that's okay. I did want to do a little bit more terrain adjustment on this side as well by this bow tie element, only because it was just kind of sitting so high up on the ground, or off the ground, that it just felt maybe a little bit too tall and too dominating around the rest of it. So I brought up the landscape a little bit to change the overall elevation for that thing, and put a pathway right next to it because that would be a really darn cool view right there. There's a lot of different strategies for these in real life. On some of the older ones, you just really couldn't even see the element. On something like Vortex at Kings Island, for example, it was kind of half buried on the side. No tunnel, actually, but kind of into a trench, and then the pathway was raised up, so you were almost kind of mid-level on it, which was kind of cool, I thought. But we don't really have the option to do that here, but that's okay. I think this one worked just fine. I do kind of regret taking out that pathway that was sort of over the water. Feels like maybe a secondary path there as a boardwalk of sorts might be the right move, but nonetheless, I think it was a decent adjustment there. Dropping in a couple of these kind of one-off stands, since we had unlocked a Fruity Ices stand, or ice cream there. So now we're going to put another little food stall here, since we did demolish that one that's by where the bow tie element is. So it feels like we ought to put one more back in. So we'll have our fries and our soda there. I am going to use the trick of putting down a fence, dropping a pathway in, and then deleting that so then the pathway doesn't connect. That lets us get a little seating area in there, which I think is kind of nice. And we're going to do a similar kind of thing right here as well. Now we've got some good little seating area, and kind of nestled into that space, used that fairly well. And also we have the nice corkscrew going over the pathway, which feels like a necessity. I don't know, for whatever reason, it feels like whenever I build a corkscrew coaster, it's got to have a pathway element of some kind through one of those corkscrews, or both if we can. So we'll do it there. Over here, I kind of like these little jetty elements of seating sticking out from the hillside there. Just kind of feels like it'd be a cool place to just kind of sit and have a quick meal and just enjoy looking across the water at that suspended coaster, at the flume, at all of that kind of stuff. and adding a little bit of theming here to the car ride, because it feels like a car ride needs theming to look in any kind of way decent. So I'll put a little lake there, put some of these statues. We don't really have a lot of options, so really all these end up kind of looking the same, but it is what it is, and I'm not totally broken up about that. I can use those miniature trees, we can use the statues and all that kind of thing, and I think we're in good shape, so not too concerned about it. Those miniature trees actually work pretty well to feel like more theming than just overall typical foliage. I do kind of like how the plaza there with the little water feature has opposing entrances for the tower and the drop coaster kind of on either side. Makes it feel like that was a properly planned thing, which I kind of like. So I do want to focus on that. And we'll drop in some other landscaping here, because we've kind of, not necessarily on purpose, but taken out a lot of the trees over the course of building all this. We'll put some of those back. And there's our win. So we completed this with, not a hugely smashed goal, but I don't think we were ever really at risk. So we were just kind of building pretty easily. And I do want to put in this a little bit of landscaping around the tunnel end here at the drop tower or drop coaster, so as you come out you kind of shoot through this section of rock work and everything here. So we'll make sure we save that up, and I think it works out pretty well. So now we can just kind of come through here and do a little bit of finishing touches in general, and do some more of the fencing and landscaping and things of that nature. But I think that's it. So let's jump over to our real-time portion and we will take a closer look. So let's see you on the other side. So here we have our completed Aqua Park. I think the map filled out fairly nicely in the end. We've got the original log flume and rapids ride there. The water slide is long gone, but that's not really much of a loss. I think our ride's layered in pretty well. We've got a nice density, but we're not really hurting for space in any one particular area. It's actually fairly spread out, to be honest, and we could definitely squeeze a lot more in here if we really needed to, but we didn't. We beat the goal fairly handily as it stands. So as we take a tour around the park here, we come in at our old entrance that goes over where the water slide used to be, that we've repurposed very nicely here for this little car ride. A little bit of theming, not a whole lot, but just works fine. Got our double swing inverter ship, which kind of seems like the easy button for that type of ride. The carousel, which came very first on our ride install list. Got our bumper boats down here, which actually has a surprisingly long queue, kind of interesting. And our Ferris wheel and shot tower right here. I do like the position of the shot tower out on that little island. Of course, here's our vertical drop coaster. High, medium for the stats, since everybody always asks what the stats are. Nice little layout, fairly realistic, I think. Wish I could make that tunnel a little bit bigger, though. Wrapping around the shot tower and down and around this final helix here into the brakes. So pretty happy with it. I think as a non-inverting drop coaster, I think it works pretty darn well. I do like this little plaza here with the opposing entries on either side, some nice little landscaping, and then also these little seating areas kind of stuck out into the landscape just a bit. We continue across, following along the lake edge here. We've got the swinging ship and our usual deployment where we have the kind of mesh fences and the rocks and the grass and things like that. So pretty standard deal, but it fits well enough. As we come up the hillside here underneath of the flume that came with the scenario, we've got our rapids, or not rapids ride here, we've got our suspended ride here. So we called this one Grandpa's Jet, which is based off of the Vekoma suspended coaster in Greenland in Japan, also called Grandpa's Jet, which is actually an orca whale, as it turns out. Nothing to do with the grandpa. We got a nice little terrain kind of element going on here. I do like this drop down and this kind of turn over top of the water. I think that's probably my favorite bit. Kind of wrapping its way up and around the hillside here with this final helix. Like I said earlier, the helix isn't exactly a standard thing from an Arrow suspended coaster, like a full helix like this, but I think it works, and you know, Arrow certainly would have done it if it was asked, so I can go with it. I think it's alright. Back up here, we've got our top spin with a little bit of a water feature back there. Maybe we should have added some fountains to it, but The one fountain that we have feels fairly large, I think, so maybe it's best to just leave it off. Our little food eating area here, and the scrambler right next to it. I actually think the scrambler ended up in a good spot. I know we moved it all around this game, but I think it worked out pretty well. I'm relatively happy with it. The Rapids ride here with the original game. It came with the scenario here. One thing that I don't really like about this one is this kind of big drop here at the end, basically right into a corner into the station. Not quite my favorite, but I didn't really want to touch it. It's already fairly integrated well into the landscape and fairly iconic, so we're just not going to mess with it. What we are going to do is build this corkscrew coaster here, which we're pretty happy with. Got the 3 trains running with the mid-course brake run, doing pretty well there, I would say. Clearing that mid-course before this one's off of the lift hill, probably by a little ways, maybe a little bit more than we need it to be. Some pacing issues here, or just inconsistent pacing, I guess. The corkscrews are maybe a tad too fast, not too much, but I think on the whole it works out pretty well. It's kind of like a smaller, more compact version of the big 7 inversion ones that were there in real life. A little bit slow on that loop, perhaps. Then we've got this loop here, which is a little bit faster, and then a little bit faster there, which is just fine, I think. Really, the helix here at the end is probably the only thing that I don't totally love. It's a little bit tight, which small helix is fine for a corkscrew coaster. It just feels fairly fast when you look at it here. Ring comes around. Fairly intense. So Afterburner was the name of this one. That was a chat suggestion. High, very high, medium, which is also not totally surprising, but we actually have a fair number of guests in the queue, so we're doing pretty well. This is a full train, and if we can keep filling 3 trains, that's pretty darn good. Here is our dueling water slide, although I guess it's just one water slide. It's Mobius, and it has medium, medium, low, which is not totally surprising because it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. It's just a lot of small little drops. But it's not getting stuck like the original one did, and I think it fits a little better into the landscape and the just overall scenario, I guess. And then finally, our haunted house here up on the hill, kind of in the usual design as we would typically do it. But, you know, all told, I think pretty good. I don't know if I did the stats for Campus Jet here. If I didn't, high, right across the board, which is kind of what I would suspect for a suspended coaster. These are fairly challenging to keep the intensity and nausea low, which is kind of interesting because the real ones just aren't that intense. But regardless, I think it turned out pretty okay, and I'm relatively happy with the 3 layouts that we did, plus all of the rest of the supporting stuff. I would love to hear what you think, or what else you would add to the park. But now we'll jump over into some before and after. But as always, thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.